people keep talking about professionalism in ways that I just did not like. People kept calling folks like me unprofessional. And I would talk about it with some of my peers outside of my school, and they would be like, what are they talking about? There needs to be a better conversation about what it means to be a professional in our work. And within that, what it means for teachers who like think of themselves as professional, but not in the ways that like the dominant culture says. Like what it means for us to like have this schism between these two parts.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Michelle.
Great to see you.
You too on this rainy day in Dallas, Texas.
It is. It's so rainy and stormy, and our daughter, who you know, Sophia, is home from college, and she's in that like decompress few days before she starts classes for summer. And so it's like a cocoon downstairs. It was like all I could do to like yank myself out of that yummy, rainy, cocoony place and come join you this afternoon.
Thank you for joining and not leaving me sitting here alone.
That said, I am really delighted that we get to talk about Jose and that people get to hear from him, because I was trying to like get my head around like what is it that's so impactful about him. And there's so many things, but what I hope listeners will listen for that's an undercurrent in his message, but is such a profound shift to how so many people are walking around in the world interacting with young people, was that I feel like he made the case for young people are already living real lives, that schools are shaping real identities, and that education is not some sort of like distant preparation for humanity, but it is humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. Educators are not doing this work that someday will matter, and kids are not like in some sort of incubator to eventually join the real world. They're in it, and the work educators are doing is impacting the shaping of what they're doing now and what they'll do in the future.
Way to open. Good opener. Shall I talk about who our guest is?
Yes, please.
Little background here. So the José Vilson, which is his code name we'll learn about, is a veteran educator. He was a classroom teacher, and I think math teacher that whole time was what I gathered, for 15 years, who boldly wrote about his experiences along the way, turned sociologist and author in New York City. He earned his PhD in sociology and education from Teachers College at Columbia University on the other side of his teaching experience. And he's currently the executive director of Educator, which is an organization dedicated to building, supporting, and amplifying communities of educators of color. I really enjoyed looking at that website, actually, for anybody who's interested in doing a little deep dive. He currently works as a researcher and an associate professor. He is the author of the best-selling book, This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education, and has written for multiple publications, ones we don't know, like the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Atlantic. Spoken everywhere. Was recently announced as a New America Fellow, and he has a second book coming out in October, What You Already Know, which will be of special interest to math teachers, it sounds like, and all other educators, and some people who are not in education as well, and he talks about that in the interview, but be on the lookout for that book.
Perfect. Let's take a listen.
Okay.
Hello, Jose.
Hi.
I'm really excited you're here. You are a voice that has inspired me and widened my lens, and so to get to talk to you today is a real honor.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome, welcome. We like to start with asking people to share a little bit about their story, and you get to pick where you start.
Well, I mean, thinking about the family stories that we just shared, I was born and raised in the Lower East Side, New York City, and I was a straight A student for the vast majority of my scholarly career, at least it's the senior year of high school. But that's a whole nother conversation. I went attended a multitude of like public and private schools, so that was cool. And then I went to Syracuse University, graduated degree in computer science. Realized computer science wasn't going to be my thing, so I went 6 months unemployed before eventually landing in teaching, in which I stayed for 15 years. And it was the same school for those 15 years. But within that, I had multiple principal changes. So it felt like a different school every other year on average. and
Oh my gosh, there are so many people listening who are going to go yes to that sentence.
Right on, right on. And just to wrap that part up, like I eventually got a offer to go to Teachers College, Columbia University to study sociology and education with a policy concentration. And that's what I just finished a couple of years ago. I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher over at Bank Street, but also the executive director of Educator and an author and a bunch of other things out there in the life. So all that to say, it's a lot of hats that I'm wearing, and I'm glad to bring them all here.
Wow, phenomenal. I didn't catch that you were a Syracuse grad. My daughter Maya, that we were just talking about, is also a Syracuse grad.
Go Qs.
Yes, that they are not joking around about their school spirit.
Not at all. The brand is super strong.
Well, it was very good for our family. We feel a lot of love for them.
Absolutely. I think some of it too is just straight up like having to brave that specific winter. And by winter, I mean the 8 or 9 months that is winter. And that kind of bonded us together in a way that other schools may not.
Y'all had like snow trauma bonding.
Yes, yes. I
Oh.
would have shed a tear, but it became into like a solid ice sheet right on my face. So
Well, we're in Dallas and don't know much about winter, and my daughter is kind of, a little bit of a free spirit, and she sent me into a total panic her freshman year when she was like, "I don't have a winter coat, and I'm the only one walking to class without one." I was like, "Oh my god." It was a shame spiral like no other, as the parent.
yeah, yeah, that's the other part too. I was lucky to have, been living in New York City where we actually had four real seasons. And so we were ready for like that. I get this one level of winter, but no, Syracuse was a whole nother level where, we had a lot to learn very, very quickly.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so in your intro comments, you mentioned Educolor. Will you let folks know what that is?
Educolor is an organization dedicated to race and social justice issues. We've been around since 2014 officially, and we've navigated a number of spaces, online spaces, but now we've been transitioning towards more offline work, thinking about policy and what it means to actually work towards like racial and social justice, but also just generally like what does it mean for actual teachers to do the real work that is necessary for our kids and communities. So our partnerships have been super strong. So we've had partnerships with TED, with the National Education Association, and not to mention all the teacher leadership that usually comes out of our org. So all that to say, we have a small but mighty team that tries to do really good work across the country and in some cases the world.
Amazing. And tell us the, like, behind the scenes of what it's been like to navigate having that mission, what's happening in our country and in the world.
You are correct. I think what I'm picking up is that yes, like it's been super duper difficult, and I think it's like relative too, right? Because we did set ourselves up as a brand of, cheery volunteers doing the work after school. And so many people who had already been doing that type of work decided to call their work Educolor. And I feel very blessed about that. At the same time, given some of the ways that people have been navigating, even notions of democracy have been really difficult in this moment in time. So we've, turned to more local grassroots efforts to really be thoughtful about how we engage with people, and then also trying to like turn outward too and say, hey, like we're going to build community with each other here, but then we're also going to do our work over there. So all that to say, like it's been a mixed bag, but I think we've been successful in really good strong pockets.
Honestly, like, I'm hearing that from so many people, just that, like, turning toward local community, turning toward people who are gonna do this work no matter what's happening at the macro level, and just linking arms and doing what we know is right for kids, regardless of the adult drama that seems to compromise that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I think even some of our tools changed. I mean, we got really popular thanks to Twitter, the platform formerly known as Twitter. And that now it's something else. And unfortunately, so too changed the ways that we were able to organize and build community very swiftly to that platform. Other platforms have not been quite as generative as that
Mm,
one used to be. So with that said, it just meant that like we needed to find more people who want to converse with other people. I think that's the move right now was, people no longer like follow big brands as it were. They follow actual people that they can
right.
talk to and turn to. And the more of us that can get together in that way, the better.
Whew. Tell me about your personal, I hate the word journey.
Yeah.
But I don't know of a better word. Is there another word? It
Is
just,
there?
there's something about that word that just feels so like not quite the right capture. But tell me about your path, I guess we could say, going from being in the classroom to having a voice that is resonant for people across the country and the world. I'm curious about that switch from the micro to the visibility that comes with. I mean, you it just kind of happened to you because you stepped into truth and people were like, I hear you. So tell me what that costs you.
Thank you for that. It's twofold, right? So I was actually doing a lot of semi-public writing when I was in college, and actually that floated right into the advent of blogging. I mean, back in the day, like we used to have all these blogs. Everybody wanted to write a blog. I was like, all right, great. Like I wanted to write, and then so one of my friends, Amber Cabral, actually told me you should write with your name attached to it. And I said, there's pros and cons to this because I literally just got hired to become a teacher, and I want to make sure that it's authentic, but I try to approach my writing in a very authentic way, but also like honest, but then also human centered, right? So even if I felt like there was a touchy topic that uh might cause rifts or might cause problems at my job, I also just tried to make sure that like it was as well rounded as possible, so it didn't
Mm.
feel like I was indemnifying somebody, right? Or making them out to be sinners or whatever. No, it was more like this is actually what happened. These are the stories, and we can, talk through some of these other pieces. And I think with that, it allowed me to create a much bigger voice from the classroom. And I was really blessed to do that in a way that I think other teachers did not either have the opportunity to do, because as we know, many states don't allow for teachers to get out there in the same way, or B, even those that didn't want to in the same way. Cause I was like, I have stories and I have things I want to say back to a lot of the different policymakers about our practice as teachers. And so that was my leadership. Of course, the cost is that obviously I probably lost a ton of sleep for it. Uh, B, I probably didn't get some of these so-called awards that people get. Like I've never been a teacher of the year. I've never like had any of these like awards that people are giving. I've gotten some. I'm not, but I'm more saying that like there are some recognitions that of course are saved for those who decide to be quiet, who
Yeah.
decide that they want to just hold off. And there are probably some opportunities that I probably would have gotten, including some that I would have cherished, like hashtag Sesame Street. Like, but that
It's not too late.
it's not too late. Like I still want to hang out with you, Elmo. Let me know what's good. Um, but it is to say that, like that forthrightness hopefully put a wedge in the door so that more teachers can have their own platforms, can vocalize what's going on in the classroom without, disrespecting kids or communities that, from which they serve, right? Like that's ultimately the mission. And if we can do that, then great. And if I helped to pave that road, then I'm really grateful for doing so.
Hmm. Mm. Tell me if I'm making this up, but you strike me as someone that it's like your mission came for you as opposed to like you projecting onto I want to do this or I want to be this person in this space. It feels like it almost like you couldn't not do it.
There is it's twofold, right? So like on the one end, I was very fortunate to have ran into histories of like the civil rights movement, for example. We see time and time again this notion of servant leadership, whether, even in my Catholic learnings when I was in all boys Catholic schools, I was learning about like the servant leader and what it means to be a man for others and all the other good stuff that comes out of a really good Jesuit education. But then also reckoning with like, Martin Luther King Jr. saying, I'm a reluctant leader in this movement and hiring all these different people, women, children, like all these different folks who, at the end of the day, it was like, okay, we may need a figure to be our spokesperson, but it doesn't mean that like we have to be at the front of what's
Mm.
happening, right? But then at the same time, like the blog era allowed for a lot of people to be a little bit more, we'll call it bombastic, right? So I was searching up for what my name was gonna be, and I realized, let me just look up my name. And sure enough, I did not see like my name anywhere in the top 10, top 20, like, Google searches. So I decided to just be wild about it. And I just put a V in front of the Jose Vilson, right? And then that's where my name came about. So in a way, it's not that I chased it, is that like I put myself in position for me to like really like just be out there and be wild. Of course, like, is that like my fullest self? Perhaps not. Like, but it is the self that allowed for me to talk back to all the policymakers, talk back to different people who didn't want teachers to thrive or students to thrive for that matter. Like it's kind of like when you tell somebody, you get to be Superman today. Like, like if you just imagine yourself that, then they would have to act like Superman as opposed to like they would
Oh,
act as themselves pretending to be that.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a different sort of hat. It's very much acting.
It's like Beyonce and Sasha Fierce.
No, I mean, yes, and I mean we're in a moment when Beyonce is Beyonce. Like, like
You refuse to be compared. She's in her own she's in her own stratosphere.
if anybody ever gives me just the one name, yep, I am good. I'm good for life. I'm like, thank you, appreciate it.
That's so awesome. I hear everything you're saying, and I also imagine that over the years of people tuning into your voice and your courage, that there was an element of like you stepping into your own liberation
Yeah.
gave permission for other people to be more in tune with their own truth and their own right to speak into it.
I hope so.
Mhm.
Like I never imagined that I was gonna be the only one. I think some folks get into this process that when they've built something that it is for them to like cut the ladder from underneath them or to like shut the door behind them and or they just want to be the only one of them in the
Mm.
room as opposed to saying actually I'll give you the whole blueprint. If you follow it, I think you'll be in good shape. And some people have tried to like straight up Xerox or copy. I'm like, I don't need you to do that. Like, I want to be better than me. I keep asking, like,
Yeah.
even people are like, oh, I'm just trying to be like you. I'm like, no, no, you don't. I want you
Be
to be better than
you.
me.
Yeah,
Yes,
be fully you. That's what the world needs.
that's it. And some people have really taken that on, and I'm really proud to have seen so many folks build that. Some people have done a whole nother thing, which I'm like, oh, this is wonderful because like you're merging all these different elements of your life and you're platforming it
Mhm.
in a space that needs it. So like Instagram used to be all about pastel colors and like pretty classrooms, for example. Now we're seeing a lot more authentic voices come to the fore and really start trying to get engaged in the democracy process. I'm really, happy about that. Similarly, I've seen other folks like take up, like their own blogs on their own or like their own writing. And I'm like, oh, great. Like you're doing this multimodal thing. Some people are just straight up going like back into classrooms and thinking about how to get better engaged. Even researchers are like, actually, we should probably like make teachers more thoughtful about the work that we're doing in addition to us just being like, the
Mm.
persons who gets a poke. It's like, oh, good. So I've done some work because too often, even as, and I'm speaking as a researcher, like too often teachers are positioned as like objects to study as opposed to, practitioners who are on equal footing with the researcher. And when you change that power dynamic, it makes it so that like teachers get to also be researchers, and for that matter, researchers get to actually be talking to colleagues about their work from different lenses. So, like all that to say, if these are the things that I was able to help in any sort of way, I'm really grateful.
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackieBox. TackieBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self reflection, students build self awareness, self regulation, and meaningful connections. TackieBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well being. Go to tackiebox.com to learn more and become a TackieBox district.
When you went back to grad school, were you just following energy, or do you have like an endpoint? You're like, I need this in order to do this. What was your hope?
Um, I'm going to couch this by saying that I am a father and somebody who really cherishes that part as well as being a husband and all that other stuff. I think that that matters a lot. So when I came in, I was already in my late 30s and I already had a different sort of energy that perhaps the average grad student at the time did, which is to say, I had an urgency about my work and I wanted to finish in 4 years. It's the first thing I said, and people were like, well, you should take like 5 to 7. I said, no, four is going to be it. And furthermore, like I'm going to excel in my classes such that I could complete my course and study. I already knew what I wanted to study. I already had a good sense of where I wanted to go. And it just mattered that I had the opportunity to do it. So I went ahead and did that. I finished in the 4 years, fastest out my program. But most importantly, like I got the research that I wanted to do because, like, ultimately, it really was about understanding how teachers understand professionalism and trying to build up on that. Not a lot of people, so I don't, disregard people who want to go through the process of the scholarly, like learning that is necessary or doing the reading, like whatever your journey is your journey. But there
Mhm.
are those of us who we don't got time for that because we we're parents or like we have people who we need to take care of or we really want to get out there in the world or like we're just not in that space. And so for
Yeah.
me, I was just in that space that said, actually, I need to focus on my child. I need to focus on my home. I need to build and I need to make sure that like I can take care of everybody. So like that's kind of how I went. But it is to say that I wasn't doing my due diligence, but it's to say that I already knew what I wanted. I just needed that doctoral PhD just to like make sure I can solidify what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, you wanted to dip into that world in order to do your work in the world as opposed to go into that world and for its sake,
That's
which to
right.
your point, like, if that's the case for someone, cool, but it wasn't for you.
No.
What is the research you're feeling is most needed at this time that would serve the humanity of teachers?
Interesting because that's exactly what my dissertation was about. So, um, it's funny. Like I started coming in with, oh, I want to talk about like the diversity of the teaching profession because so many people were talking about it at that moment in time, well before what's going on right now at the federal level. But fast forward, and all of a sudden, I'm seeing a real problem, which is to say that people keep talking about professionalism in ways that I just did not like. And of course, I was hampered by it as somebody who was a 15-year teacher. Even when I had already achieved national board certification, people kept calling folks like me unprofessional. And I would talk about it with some of my peers outside of my school, and they would be like, what are they talking about? But then they'd also tell me stories about what happened to them, and I said, "Oh, so there needs to be a better conversation about what it means to be a professional in our work, and within that, what it means for teachers who like think of themselves as professional, but not in the ways that like the dominant culture says."
Mm.
Like what it means for us to like have this schism between these two parts, right? So what I ended up formulating was like it's a mixed method study, surveyed more than 100 teachers, interviewed about 26 of them, and I came up with this like thought process that basically said you might think like teachers don't think of themselves as professional, but to the contrary, they do. As
Mhm.
soon as they hit like 3 or 4, they already know that they're professional. But the way that they think about and conceptualize professionalism is wholly different than the ways that people are making it out. Like it's not about your dress, your composure, your comportment and behavior. It's not about the way you speak, and it isn't even about like the extent to which you obey. Which, by the way, ends up being the number one reason why people are considered like an unprofessional, in my
Mm.
opinion. Like
Mm.
people, the extent to which a teacher complies or obeys to different mandates. And I hear the deep breathing because it's real, right?
Mm.
Like people thinking, oh, because you didn't obey, you are unprofessional. Versus where when I talk to teachers, and mind you, a whole wide variety of teachers from across different cultures, different contexts, rich, poor, service students who are predominantly white, service students who are predominantly black, like you name it, Asian, across the board. It was just the extent to which the teacher's job was attached to the work that they do with students and communities, if I could sum it up. Like, I have more detail on that, but the general, like, vibe you should be getting is like, do I care deeply about my work with kids?
Mhm.
Do I come in with that motivation constantly? Am I prepared to do so? And am I determined to make what's right for kids at the center of the thing that I believe? And
Mm.
if you have that, then you are a professional in the eyes of the folks who are doing the work. Now, that is also to say too that once they have that within them, they judge everybody else based on that frame. So if you're a principal listening to this, for example, you're like, huh, like the teachers who really care about their work, if I align to them, then they like me. But if they don't, like if the principal doesn't align to this idea of like being student centered, truly student centered, community centered, then they are less effective in the eyes of those teachers. And for that matter,
Mhm.
that also goes for the bigger policymakers too, across the board, whether they're local, state, federal. So, like, there's more to say on that, but that's the general gist that people should be getting is like, to what extent do you feel like your work is connected to the kids and communities that you wish to serve? And if you know the answer to that question, then you're a professional. And if you don't know that answer, then maybe you have something to think about.
Lean toward it. Yeah, yeah. Ooh, that is such an interesting thing to study because it makes me think about like the number of educators in our country that are zeroing in on the kids and the communities and showing up in a way that is resonant for their chief stakeholder, the students, th- that could be and are perceived as somehow rebelling or like not showing up in a way that, crosses T's or dots I's because those two things are in conflict right now, big time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, what I would also offer too, by the way, is like as a sociologist, I tried not to think too much about the architecture of things and more about the relationships between people and then
Mm.
what happens to those relationships at scale. So as a very quick example, like during the 2020 shutdowns, we were able to quickly transform many of our really complicated school systems towards a virtual learning experience, which I just call disaster distance learning. I didn't even call it virtual learning because that's just not wasn't it. But
DDL.
it was a lot. It was a lot. And I went through that too. So, shout out to us for making it through that. And recognizing that because we were able to do that so quickly, that means school still happens even when we were not in the school building. And so that speaks volumes about the things that we need to start really considering when it comes to how we do school and why we do school and who is best served by us doing the work that we do. And too often people want to strip us from like the teaching and learning process when in fact students are time and again asking for teachers to teach them actual human beings. And then us as teachers, we need students, like that's our work, and regardless of how they come in, when they come in, we know that like without them there is no us in that way. And so like that's our work, and that really is democracy building because our schools and really our classrooms are like little d democracies, right? So like in the ways that we shape that, we actually get to give students visions for what's possible out there, which is probably why some folks want to disrupt that. That's a good conversation too. But it is to say that like if we were intentional about the ways that our classrooms move, even like the things that we do in terms of the rules, those are policies. We are building policy. And so if we were able to show students that, hey, you can actually run a whole globe based on the ways that we construct our classroom, you know how powerful that would be for so many of our students in terms of being like fully engaged citizens. That's a really powerful frame for the ways that we ought to be thinking about school more generally.
Oh, that's phenomenal. It gives that bakes in that sense of agency and understanding from the jump instead of it feeling like so separate from them.
Amen. Amen. And it's not like I'm sure you don't like this. There's another word for that, but I try not to say the word hate. I try to say the word I don't like. But I don't like when people say, "Oh, this is a real world example." It's all real world. All of it is real world. And it's just a matter of like how we make sure it's connected. Like even in the math classroom, people will say, "Well, you don't get to talk about this, that, and the third. Like you don't get to talk about real world issues. You don't get to talk about like news and everything." I'm like, I was the teacher that students specifically turned to when things got ugly or when things got weird because they knew A, that I cared about them, and that
Right.
B, I would be honest with them, but then C, that I would put their voices first before I actually got to my voice. And then we'd be able to talk about math content. And even within the math content, so I'll put it to you another way. How can students trust you with their minds if they can't trust you with their hearts?
Mm,
Right?
mm,
And so, with that in mind, it's important for us to think about how can we make sure that students see the connections that they have and why this teacher's trying to teach the thing that they're trying to teach. I mean, I can't remember the last time a student said, "Oh, um, I don't want to learn this today. Why is it not connected to real life? When are we going to use this?" When they felt connected to the material. When I said, "I
mhm.
really care about you learning this." Like when I did these things, they said, "All right, cool. I'm with you. I'm with you on the journey. Let's do it." But unfortunately, too many of our classrooms, they don't have an opportunity to connect to the content, not so much to the person. And so if they don't, then that becomes a harder road for them to learn.
Mm. When I think about how, like, when you kind of pull up and out of just that tyranny of incremental change, like we've got this tyranny of incremental change where we've normalized some really weird stuff in education. But if you were to like pull up and imagine you're coming from another planet and you're just observing and you see that these adults are spending 8 hours a day with young people and they're not talking about things they're not allowed to talk about things that shape that young person's sense of self, sense of who they might be in the world, sense of, what they're here to do.
Yeah.
It's just, it's maddening to me how far we've gotten from creating the containers for young people to become themselves, and what it does to educators who know how to do that and
Yes.
feel like they're being asked to tie their hands behind their backs.
That's a really rough road, right? And it's funny because people talk about like red states, blue states. For teachers, there is no such thing. Like that dichotomy is actually false because ultimately people like have been trying to like narrow that which is teaching for a long time. And again, going back to professionalism, how many rubrics constantly come out about us saying this is how you're supposed to teach, these are the moves you're supposed to make, and then there are certain schools where they literally script the curriculum
Yes.
and they tell you exactly this is how you teach. But then, like, how do you build a curriculum without the actual students? People build these things and it's like, oh, it was vetted by this and the third. Great. Let me see the vetting. And the vetting is usually like, oh, like it's aligned to the standards. But is it aligned to kids? And often it isn't. And so that's one part of it. And the second part of it is that, like, yes, there's a lot of teachers who have their hands tied behind their back across the board in so many different contexts that you wouldn't believe. Even here in a place like New York City, where everybody says, "Oh, you're free to do this, that, and the third." Not always. And so, I would offer for people that like when we do teaching well, we can teach subversively. We can teach with good questions. We can ask
Mhm.
and prefer and say, "Hey, like." Even if I can't use the same words that I would like to use, that it doesn't mean that I lose the vision and the
Right.
vision towards like a shared humanity, a vision towards like compassion and empathy for others. It really resonates for so many people. And so we're always going to like talk about like the end goal, even when we have to change the words. So like excellent to me doesn't just mean test scores. And in fact, it's usually like tertiary, if not secondary. Like for me, excellence means that we get to see each other fully, that we are participants, citizens, that we have access to all the things that we deserve to access it full, fully go after the dreams that we deserve. And, even being able to have a sustainable life. Like, I don't
Mm,
think any of those pieces like strip people away from that which they deserve. So
mm,
if we're able to go that way, then great. And if you have a different language in which you get to go that, like if you get to go farther than what I just said, great. But
mm,
if you can get to that part, because we have such a lack of compassion and a lack of empathy, then we'd be better off for having all those compassionate and empathetic teachers and folks who are really thinking deeply about how do we get towards that shared humanity. And so, good on us for trying that time and again.
Oh, so true. And who doesn't want to stay in that profession that you just described? Like you think about retention and recruitment and that deeper understanding of professionalism like your research is showing, who doesn't want to stay in that profession?
Yep, yep. And for that matter, who doesn't want a community like that, right? So what I often found is that people who want to like do this for a long time, they have a set of teachers who also believe in similar things, and then they build together. Like when you hear things like, teacher residencies are usually more successful than if you're just going the direct route, or like the programs that have cohort based I guess situations or teaching programs are usually more successful than the ones who just get let do whatever they want. I have some sort of autonomy. I think there's a reason for that. Like teachers, like anybody, are social beings. So if we hang around people who are locked into a similar mindset about how we operate with children, with communities, with schools more generally to make them more vibrant, more energetic, more human centered. Like I can't tell you how many schools I walk into, and within like 2 minutes, I know, this is a school that I don't want to be at, or this is a school that kids are gonna thrive. Oh, you could feel it. And I was just at a school just last week where it was like, oh, like kids like being here, and I haven't even spoken to one yet. So I know But unfortunately, we don't have enough spaces for us to talk about those soft skills. But it is to say that like community centered, and by community, I do mean multiple things. I mean the surrounding neighborhood, but I'm also talking about the people who you consistently talk to as practitioners. Like that's why I didn't hang out too much in the teachers lounge when in my heyday, just because I knew like I wanted to make sure that my energy was where I needed to be for my students. But anyway, just long story short, if we're able to have educators of all types say to each other, how can we build community with each other as peers so we can stay here for the long term? That's a profession I want to be in as well. So, and of course, the folks who want to leave tend to be with either don't have a community like that, or then B, like are surrounded by people who also want to leave. So,
Mhm, mm. And that strength of community you speak of, like, that to me feels like the only way this can be a quote unquote fair fight. Like the cards are stacked in a way that if you're trying to go at this absent community and absent community care, it's just not a fair, it's not anywhere close to a sustainable or a fair fight.
that's right. That's right. I can't tell you how many teachers I see, for instance, on the Instagrams. They have 100,000 followers plus, but they are lonely
Mhm.
because it is the singular hero teacher trying to do it all versus there are teachers who only have maybe 500, 600 people, but those folks, when they put out the call out, like they put out the signal, people reach back out to them because they developed a really strong community. Like, good on you for doing that. That is so much more valuable out there in the real world. Like, what's the point of having any of these tools? And it's not just talk about the social media part, right? But it is to say that like when we are really thoughtful about how we engage our communities and our people and tap into each other, we become that much more powerful because of that element. Like that's a strong thing, and we need to continue to lean on that.
Oof. I mean, you're making me think so much about, and like you said, this isn't about slamming social media, but but over the course of the last 10 years or whatever, I do think there's been like a massive body snatching from people's real life and real communities into these virtual spaces that are there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of funhouse weirdness going on there that you can or can't trust depending. But uh, I know for me personally, when I stepped away from social media, I felt like I had the bandwidth and there was something came alive in me that allowed me to move back into my actual community and back into my actual relationships. Other people maybe can do both at the same time, but even if just people raise their awareness about the fact that there is there's a lot of money being made keeping your eyeballs and your heart and your spirit in these virtual spaces and often in a state of fear and outrage, and you have to decide what your nervous system needs in order to then do your actual work in the world. That's a lot of jibber jabber, but hopefully you can make sense of it.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And truly, I think everybody needs to navigate any of these tools that we use. And that includes, for example, the Gen AIs and all that other stuff too, because so often our brains are consistently under attack from folks who do not wish us well. So, like, when I get out there, and by the way, like, I am very grateful for social media just in the way of connecting me to so many different opportunities and perhaps indirectly, even this podcast.
Yes,
That's
that's how I found you.
right. So,
Thank you, World Wide Web.
I'm saying, and developing a healthy relationship with all the technologies and technology in the broad sense, right,
Yeah.
is actually good as long as you understand the agency and you're able to be thoughtful. If you mindlessly, and I mean like truly just hop on something and say, oh, like I'm gonna just let my like this thing take over what my thinking process is, then we are inevitably doing the same thing we critique kids for when they don't write good essays, for example. Like we need to ensure that we have some form of like agency, but also forthrightness and continual critique of that which we are consuming. But then also too, like if we endeavor on using social media as a platform for good, then we also have to, be clear about our intentions and
Mm.
maybe our worries, our vulnerabilities, and show ourselves as full human beings, as opposed to like some of what is out there, which is like, we only show one very specific dimension that becomes highly sanitized and highly I guess pinpointed towards an experience that we want to show so that we can gain more following, a very shallow following, but nevertheless, as opposed to like deep ties that we need to have in order to inform more people.
Yeah, yeah, what a great distinction you're making because the people in that space that are showing up, you know, as their whole selves with their whole complicated relationship with everything they're trying to do, that, like, is so normalizing, and it makes you feel less alone, whereas the kind of, like, hyper, um, curated images that make people feel more alone. Yeah, that's a great distinction.
Absolutely, absolutely. We just keep building. So let's
Mm,
build something.
mm, mm. There's a group of people who listen and watch this podcast that are not educators, but they care deeply about the educator experience.
Thank you.
From I know, thank you, thank you. From your work, what do you think they ought to understand about the inner worlds of educators right now?
Oof. Well, here's some things. First of all, is that like the reason why we even have education to begin with is to ensure that societies can continue to live and thrive, right? So, like, and that goes across time, across space. The reason why we teach is to make sure that humanity can keep going. Without that educational process, we do not have that. And so, it is why, for example, like when you have a survey that says, well, most teachers trust, most parents trust teachers. Great. But then when you go through it with a fine tuned comb, you realize that actually people who have children in the public school system are more likely to trust teachers and their schools than folks who don't, meaning that there's an investment that we see tangibly in vis-a-vis the student who is within that system, right? And so even those of you who do not have children within the system ought to know that like when people hand over their most prized possession, and by prized possession I do mean their children, into the school system, it inevitably means that like it is just that much more important that we do the work that we do. We need to make sure that our schools are well resourced. We need to make sure that teachers are able to teach with the breadth of like knowledge that has been invested on us so that we can divulge that to the students who are in front of in front of us, not so that we can like indoctrinate them, but to the contrary, is so that we can actually like free them to do the best possible like living that they need to do. Like so too often we see students who are disheartened by the education system, who feel like there's no point to it. Teachers can be that lever because we are folks who are like naturally inclined to think more justly, because we came to like we didn't come into this for the paychecks, right? So we actually came into this because we really really care about kids, we really care about communities, and so why not leverage that? And of course it is also to say too that teachers are actually more likely to be the folks who um parents and community members trust when it comes to issues that are out there too. So we are actually like these like vanguards in a way
Mhm.
of the American democracy, because of the ways that, we are able to be those interlocutors between like governmental agencies and the communities that are there. So
Yeah.
too often we are not looked at as that, but that is so much of our work, but it isn't like described as such because it would just be too easy to, pay us accordingly.
Yes, 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 yes. We're leaving so much on the table.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, in terms of what of accepting, acknowledging, celebrating, and setting up educators for the kind of power they do have in our systems. And I mean, they're midwifing the future, literally.
Ooh, that's a powerful way of thinking about this. So much of my research too, because teaching is a woman dominated profession. We need to be more thoughtful about like how we talk about like teaching as a project that elevates women. and that
Mm.
elevates our folks who may be aligned in that way. And for that matter, for the men who are in the profession, we also need to say, yeah, listen, women deserve equal if not more rights because of the deep work that they do with kids. I can't tell you how like powerful it is to have a very good elementary school teacher, and that sets students up for a trajectory of really awesome things. Like, I was fortunate that my son had this pre-K teacher called Miss McCutcheon. She was so powerful for him because immediately, like, it just felt like he blossomed and opened up in a way that he didn't in our own. By the way, our home has two educators, so we know what we're doing, right? And so, we read to him constantly. We talked to him in the right ways that we were supposed to, but it took an elementary school educator
Yeah.
who also knew her craft for years on decades plus,
Yes.
who came in and said, "Let me teach him how to be a good student." And even to this moment, he is a straight A student. He's flourishing, but I really do think it started from that first experience that he had, and he was able to be resilient even when there were some teachers who weren't as good as her. For example, like, he was able to just manage his own mind because
Yes.
he had that learning within him. How powerful is it for the rest of society to know that a really good elementary school teacher is perhaps even better than having a really good high school teacher, because having that foundation of saying, you know what, you can learn academically, socio emotionally, all at the same time, and have that like really good foundation of it, and you can only go up from wherever I've left you. Whew, powerful.
So powerful. And what's crazy is if we lined up 100 people, 98 of them would be able to tell a story like you told about the pre-K teacher. And still, we don't set up the macro in a way that aligns with that deep understanding we all have from our own personal experience with our kids or ourselves.
That's
So
right.
interesting.
That's right. And of course, we see time and again in our own research that when it comes to women specifically in like the research body, like this notion of care is specifically undervalued. People too often call it a soft skill, but I would argue that actually that instinctual, that human centered, like way of approaching care isn't just like, we're going to be kind to you. It's actually like, let me actually teach you how to approach other human beings.
Mhm.
Let me actually teach you how to talk to yourself well,
Mhm.
because a lot of us are suffering from real like image issues and seeing ourselves well. So if you have a teacher who could say, actually, like, you get to love yourself, and with that you get to love others, and then for that matter, when you feel some sort of rage, you should be using words and a thought process that allows you to get back to your fullest self. That is powerful. Like, we have adults right now who have real anger issues who probably need a lot more care and probably didn't get that care when they, deserved it at those critical moments, right? And so
Mm,
if
mm.
they had been taught with a pedagogy of love and a pedagogy of care, imagine how much better our world would have been as a result. But unfortunately, we devalue elementary school teachers in a way that like doesn't allow them to say like, I care about you academically, but I also need to care about you social emotionally so you could be a really good human being and be a good citizen for the world moreover.
Mm, mm. From your lens, with the sociology degree, with the equity work you've done, if you were gonna open a school tomorrow, what would be your top 3, like, non-negotiables?
Number one would be retake any and all students. Every
Mm.
single one. I think heterogeneity is severely underrated. And obviously, this is me coming from the New York City context, but we share buses, we share trains, we share space. And I think that we share parks. And that shared space is where we get to be better human beings. So much of what like drives the rest of society is like car culture. So we only see each other like in these vehicles that are containers, so that we don't necessarily have to interact with anybody,
Yeah.
unless of course we get to a SpaceX. And even in our schools we have way too much separation, right? But
Man.
if we were to get, so number one would be, let's make sure that everybody sees everybody, and for that matter, like, number two, we can have IEPs and all these other different labels to help support students, but really we need to be more thoughtful about what those labels mean, and then to ensure that it's not that we're stifling the labels,
Mm,
is that like we're really being critical of them and then pulling them back so that everybody gets the same level of learning experience and academic learning experience that
mm,
they deserve. Like we shouldn't walk around classrooms saying, "Oh, that's uh, classroom with IEP students. That's a classroom for multilingual learners." It's like, no, you walk into every classroom and you see rich learning experiences happening for them, adjusted to the people who are in them, like
mm,
point blank. And then three, there has to be an ethos of empathy, love, and care with every single adult. And of course, not just to students, but also just to themselves and each other. I can't tell you how many teachers like are struggling. And I've been that teacher, right? Where because I wasn't kind to myself, I wasn't as kind as I could have been to the rest of the people who I was trying to serve. And then I would have to apologize immediately because I found myself like in a really dark place, for example. There have
mm.
been those times, but
Yeah.
I think every teacher ought to find a way to forgive themselves for they're not their best, but then also be pushed to do their best so that we can all do our best work together, right?
Mm,
And so, and I'm sure you've known this too. When you have a teacher who doesn't like get this like regulation or doesn't have this care, it affects the rest of the student's school day, like
mhm,
throughout. So
mhm.
you'll have one teacher who's just not doing very well, but then the rest of the schedule suffers because that whole set of 30 students, they travel every single class. How do you remember that one teacher? So
Yeah.
we
Yeah, I mean,
we
that's
gotta do better.
you named it. That's literally the whole point of our podcast and magazine is that if we don't care for the adults in the building, it's kind of all for naught.
Mhm, mhm. That
Yeah.
oxygen is super real, and those
Mhm.
breathers are necessary.
Mm.
So, like, when I hear oxygen, I not just mean the breathing in, but then also what are we breathing out? Like, what are we putting out into the world so that everybody can breathe collectively?
Wow, 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 wow. Oh my god. Okay, so I feel like I should just end it right there because that's so potent. But was there anything you wanted to make sure we talked about?
I would just add that I do have a book coming out in October that has everything to do with the work that I'm doing with it comes to math. Every time I think I leave, it calls me right back. But Heinemann is going to be coming out with it. And furthermore, it really is a call to teachers to ensure that math is also included in the conversation that we have about like really good teaching more generally.
Mm,
Like, and it's for everybody who's not a teacher, but it's also really good for teachers too. So that's what I want to add
beautiful.
there.
What is the title? Is it titled yet?
Yes, it's called What You Already Know.
Ooh,
So
good title.
thank you. It assumes that students already know things and that we need to leverage those things in order to help them become the best student possible for themselves. So I'm
Nice.
really looking forward to, and by the way, like the editor, like she read it and she's like, oh, like I already learned something from it. And I literally just applied it while I was reading this. I said, oh, that's it.
That's what you
That's
wanna
it.
hear.
That's I did it. I'm
You're
out.
like, "I will sleep well tonight."
That's right.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm gonna be on the lookout for it personally, so thank you for letting us know it's coming. And then you have, how else can people find you and learn from you and stay in touch?
I am hyper responsive on Instagram as well as Threads and somewhat responsive on Blue Sky. But generally, if people want to just go to my website, thejosevilson.com, I respond via form very well too. So if you want to subscribe, if you want to like keep up with me more generally, that's my hub.
Perfect. Thank you for taking this time, and thank you for being the beacon in this space that you are. Really appreciate you.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
All right, we are back. What is it that caught your attention, Chris?
Well, there were many things, as always. But let's start, if you don't mind, with just talking about his path and kind of fill in a few of the gaps. So you found him online, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. And he referenced in your conversation that during his time as a math teacher in New York, he was a big voice from the classroom, which I thought was interesting. That he always had the intention of opening doors for other educator voices to be heard. You referenced that he stepped into truth and went public. So I wondered, like, in your research, what you know about that. I was really curious.
Yes, there's going to be so many more angles to this than I can speak to, but what I was noting was the way he was blogging and writing, and it was just from such a non-performative truth tenor that just cut through the noise, and so that's what I was referring to.
Okay. Because he also said, I love what he said, that he took the bombastic approach and created the stage name, right? The José Vilson, or we should just call him Jose because he said he wanted to be one name, right? Then he would have really arrived. But that he did that so that he could talk back to policymakers and other people who don't want teachers to thrive. He's very vocal about that, which I thought was interesting, while simultaneously holding that intention for other educator voices to be heard. I just thought that was cool.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, like such a big macro vision while being so student-centered. That's a unique thing to strike because I think a lot of people are, like, so student-centered that swallows them up completely, and they're just doing that incredible work day in and day out, or some people are so macro focused that they're the way they interact with people in the real world is not on par with the way they show up externally. The way he talked about his work, it felt like he found a way to stay so deeply connected to the work, to the community, to kids and elevating their voices and centering their experience. And that fueled his unapologetic voice on the macro stage.
I love that. Yeah.
I want to talk about something that is not fully formed, but I want to say it just in case anyone else had a similar experience. Because after I did this interview, it was such a joyful interview. You know me well enough to know how much he made me laugh, like hard cackle laughing. Like, I don't know why, but he really made me laugh and he really made me think. And then afterwards, and when I was reviewing it to prepare for this conversation, I noticed like a layer of melancholy and bittersweetness. And I was like, what is this about? What's happening for me about around this? And I think what I came to was that he speaks about this work with so much heart, so much centering of humanity, so much vision and possibility. And I think it made me sad to think about what would it be like if voices like his were elevated and had more power at a systemic level to create something extraordinary for students instead of always being kind of like, pushing against a current that is not always in service of students and in service of communities. And so I got a little like, heavy hearted about that, but also it is what it is. And he is not deterred by the realities, and so that, like, kinda pulled me out of it, and was like, "Yeah, this is what it is, and how are we gonna show up in the face of it?"
It is what it is right now, right?
Mhm.
Right now.
Mm.
But I sort of felt a little bit the opposite.
Mm.
He made me feel very hopeful that the work we're doing right now, like on this podcast, matters. Because it's the work that he almost seeded this, years ago when he started writing with the intention that other people would bring their voices to the table. And I think by nature, educators are not platform builders. So we're building the platform and getting out of the way and letting their voices come in. And so I felt kind of inspired because I thought also when I looked at Educolor website, and that's what they're doing too, and in their own way. And I thought, okay, well, now look at all these ways that these voices are getting out. And when policymakers start listening to the people that we have on this podcast and start, like this does start cutting through. And as we know, this is the year of transition, the year of the horse, right? That all these things are happening faster. So maybe this is the year, or at least this is the seed. So I appreciate your perspective, and I'll add that.
That's really nice, and that resonates at a heart level for me when you say it that way. So yay.
Awesome.
What else is on your list?
Let me see where I want to go next. Oh, I was just thinking, especially because we've been talking lately that there are some people outside of education who are listening to this podcast. And you two referenced teachers not being allowed to talk about things that shape a young person's sense of self or what they're here to do. Jose specifically referenced people trying to narrow that which is teaching for a long time. There was conversation about scripting the curriculum. So I just wondered if you might provide just a little bit of quick context for anyone who's listening that doesn't get that, because truthfully, I didn't get that until we started working specifically in this space. Even when I was doing launching TakiBox inside elementary schools, I didn't understand that piece of it. So I thought that would be good context because a lot of the points relate to that.
Yes, there are so many people who could speak to this better than me, so I'll just hobble, and then hopefully maybe other people can help us round out the picture. But my perspective of it is, it's a continuum ranging from just the tightening of control of what's happening. And some of it comes from a place of a desire to have standards, but what it did was it kind of like pulled the autonomy out from under great teachers who are wanting to like be in the moment with a child, but they would be penalized to the degree of, even if you are not on this page at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, you could get dinged. Never mind that there's a child in front of you who's clearly needing to either review something or needing to have a moment of connection so that they can get back in their prefrontal cortex and actually hear what you're saying, like whatever those things are that teachers do so intuitively. So that's been going on for some time. Then what we've seen in the last few years is just like a complete attack on free speech for educators. There's tons of fear mongering around, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion language, but also social emotional health language, things like empathy getting vilified. Any conversation with a student around, how are they doing could make a teacher a target from some of these extreme groups who are spinning the narrative that teachers have some sort of agenda, when actually they're just trying to create the container for your kid to make sense of the world and become who they're going to become.
Thank you. I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. Do you want to bring one up?
Yeah. I loved his research and I wanted to hear more. Like, I want to fully nerd out on his research about professionalism, and just the way he kind of a little bit teased us with some of what he's finding, which it sounds like it's that there's a definition of professionalism that's getting imposed upon teachers that often has a lot to do with compliance and obedience. And then there's the definition that the educators he included in his research used, which had a lot more to do with commitment to their craft, commitment to the communities they serve, centering student voice, like those sorts of things. I was fascinated by that and excited by it, and thought he did a really even-handed job of surfacing it. But there's still a real edge to it because there's a real edge to the situation.
I thought that was so interesting too. And specifically, I felt like there was a really big message in that piece of the discussion for principals, administrators, and policymakers, because if they're not student-centered, the teachers that we want teaching our kids don't want to be there teaching, right? Like, I wouldn't say that. It's not they don't want to be there teaching. They've lost respect for leadership,
Yeah.
right? It's that
Yeah.
flipped pyramid again.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really interesting just to think about it from that standpoint. What would it be like if a principal came into a school and clearly shifted the definition from compliance to student-centered? Which is also, that was interesting that he said he had so many principals during those 15 years and it felt like a different school every year.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too.
What else is on your list? I've got a few more.
I liked the conversation thinking about being engaged in the democracy process, and he was talking about kind of encouraging other voices to step up and be part of that. Or, this is what I really loved, he said, or just go back into the classroom and be really, really engaged. And I thought that was just worth pointing out for our listeners that, yes, you might want to write and have a voice like he does, or Pernille Rip, or some of the thought leaders we've had in education we've had on, but also another way to really engage is just to show up and do that very important work every day from a place of keeping that student-centered. But I liked the thought about thinking about it from the standpoint of being engaged in the process.
Oof, that's so good. And this is a shade different, but connected. I loved how he talked about classrooms are little d democracies, and just how if you can help students understand that what they're experiencing in the system that they're in every day, all day long, is akin to what's happening in the larger political system, that they can begin to like understand power over them, also their own power, shared power, all the things he kind of alluded to. I just thought that was like, of course he's right. And it's the way we talk about educators being the most important thing for the future that we all wish for. He articulated why. Yeah, it's like, yeah,
did.
this is and he also said, and if it was ever admitted that that's what's happening, then they would have to be paid better.
He
So
did say that, yes.
There's like an element of like,
Let's just keep that to ourselves.
yeah,
Yes.
let's just hope they keep doing it out of the servant leadership headspace and heart space. But what would happen if we as a culture, and I love your point of not yet. So, let's start speaking some of this into existence. Like, what would happen if we really acknowledged and understood and then compensated for it, and created the conditions that would attract the Jose's and also the teachers that you were just describing that maybe don't want to be in the macro platform, but want to do brilliant community-centered work day in and day out. Yeah, I'm getting verklempt.
Yeah, but you're not melancholy anymore, so we got that going for us. Okay, so that kind of segues to the point I wanted to make or just bring up of his about elementary teachers.
Mm.
And he specifically said how they're so undervalued. And if you're thinking about the impact that they have on training a student's mind, and it took me, so I agree, and I appreciated that he said it that directly.
Yeah.
But it also made me think about our work with Tacky Box in elementary schools, teaching kids to self-regulate, and then how you really, when you joined, I'd been doing this for a decade, and you were the one who called out, it's teaching elementary students how to be in community with one another. And that was kind of the big piece of my own work I didn't even realize I was doing. But that's it. And so it's tied to the little d democracy, right?
Yeah.
But it starts that early. And so elementary teachers are really the ones who, the catalysts, the ones that first could introduce the concept.
Yes, yes. I mean, those early experiences, that's what gives us a grid for everything that comes after. And so if you have a teacher that lights up your sense of self, your creativity, helps you see yourself as a learner, creates like growth mindset, like all of those things, then, that like just builds on itself in middle, high leadership, on and on and on. An example of the alternative that I think almost everyone can connect to, at least our age, almost all of us have a story of an art or a math teacher who said something offhand that made us stop thinking of ourselves as artistic, creative, good at math. Like so yeah, those early the words, the nervous system regulation, it's all like it can either be used to just catapult kids or it can be weaponized against kids.
And also, he made the comment about at that age teaching kids how to approach each other, even like how to interact with each other, which is, that's missing in our world
Yeah.
in many, many places.
Yeah. And to your earlier question of like, what are the ways teachers are getting kind of like hamstrung? That's another way. Like things like teaching kids how to cooperate, communicate. Um, there's all these weird, at least in some states, although I really appreciated his point about like, hey, in education, red state, blue state, all educators are feeling the squeeze of systems that don't allow them to do their craft. And I have no idea what point I was making, so I'll just stop.
Well, you were giving some appreciation, so we'll just go with that. I liked his definition of excellence in teaching. Saying it's definitely not about the test scores. And I wrote down, he said, we, students and teachers, what his vision of excellence would be that we, students and teachers, see each other fully, that we are participants, citizens who have access to all the things we deserve to have access to, go after the dreams we deserve, and have a sustainable life. Utopia.
That was so powerful, and it just kinda came out of him. But that is like you could build your whole life around that one concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, I think educators who are listening to this podcast probably did,
Mhm.
right? That's what they signed up to do.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Before we move on, although we kind of already did move on from this point, but when he was talking about elementary students, how cute was it him talking about his child and the pre-K teacher that was so magical, and the fact that they're both educators, mom and dad are both educators, and they were still like they needed that external elementary school force to kind of open up this extraordinary path for their son, and I just loved that. That was so cute to me.
It was. It was.
What else you got?
I liked the discussion around disaster distance learning. Um, but just that the message was actually that the lesson that we could all take from that was that teachers and students need each other. Like that's the central piece of what school is. And I certainly never thought about that was what I took away from COVID. But when he said that, I just kind of started thinking about, I'll never forget, I think Jake was in 4th grade at the time. So I was trying to teach him 4th grade math very unsuccessfully because I didn't do math the same way. Like I could tell him the answer, but I didn't know how to tell him how. And so his teacher had like a parent Zoom call that I was on, and she started crying on the call. And her father was older, and she was his caretaker. So I think they'd gone back to the classroom or gone back to school at this point, but we were still social distancing. And she was sitting there with her mask on, and she was crying because she said, I know how to teach math when the students can come up around me around my desk and I can show them things and I can draw for them and I can talk to Jake the way Jake wants to be spoken to. And she couldn't do that. Like that was taken away from her. And so that was just a real visual and a personal anecdote that when he said that, I was just like, oh, yes, that's what was missing. It was that one-to-one between Jake and that teacher. So I just appreciated that because that wasn't a takeaway that I had from that experience until he verbalized it that way.
Yeah, I had something in my notes about it's getting darker in here and I'm like, I can't even see. But I had something in my notes about that relationships are rigor. Like seeing relationships and the relational aspect of instruction as rigor and that it's a false divide. This notion of humanity and academic excellence having, two opposite poles there. It's like a prerequisite for the most extraordinary academic excellence is the relational piece, which is certainly what I've seen my whole career.
Mm-hmm. He worded it that from his standpoint, his students wouldn't learn math unless they know he cares about them, he was honest with them, and he put their voices before his. And then they could learn math.
Yes. Yes.
And I also appreciated that he talked about students, like he acknowledged that students are disheartened by the system right now. And also said, how can students trust you with their minds if they can't trust you with their hearts?
I was waiting for that one. I knew that one was coming. Yes.
Beat you to it.
Yes, that is it.
That's it.
How can students trust you with their minds if they can't trust you with their hearts?
That's amazing.
Amazing.
Okay, so since our podcast is called Oxygen for Educators, let's give a little piece of oxygen, a little bit of oxygen here, around just the discussion around creating a community. And I felt like what I heard him saying was the sustainability of the profession and the joy that comes from the profession can last if you find a community of compassionate, empathetic teachers who are thinking deeply about how we move towards a shared humanity and just create your own collective wherever you are. And I think last week we talked about even if that's one person, just one person who shares that thinking, stay out of that teacher lounge if it's negative, if it's got a negative tone there, and go to your person that thinks the way that you think.
Yeah, it was such a great echo from Cass and Cornelius of just like, let's find our people and do the work. And that is it. That's the game. That game is not the right word, but
it's where the sustainability and joy come from, I think,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Now, Cass and Cornelius took it to the nth degree when they decided to marry each other, but
Exactly. Oh, I didn't ask how Jose and his wife met because they're both educators. I wonder.
Oh,
He didn't speak to that, right? I'm
he
not
did not.
forgetting. Yeah.
No, you
Wouldn't
guys must
that
have
be a
talked about
kick?
that before you started record.
No, we didn't. We didn't. But now I'm kind of curious because I'm like, what if that mirrors Cass and Cornelius somehow too? That would really be crazy. I
They're
wonder if they
drinking the
know
Kool-Aid.
each other. They're both in New York, so
If
they
not,
very
they
well
should.
might. They totally should. I have one more, which I'm
Okay,
happy to dive into or wait.
go ahead.
I thought I want to read his quote. He said that oxygen is super real and those breathers are necessary. Like when I say, when I hear oxygen, I am not just meaning breathe in, but also what are we breathing out? Like what are we putting out into the world so that everyone can breathe collectively? That was so I couldn't even absorb that. It was so wise to think of oxygen as not just what we're taking in, but being responsible for what we're putting out and understanding that that shapes other people's rights to also breathe and our capacity to breathe collectively. I just thought that was chef's kiss. Poetry.
And that goes back to educators being the most powerful position in the country because they're in a space to do that for up to 24 kids.
If they're lucky.
They're lucky.
Some schools more.
Right?
Oh,
I have one final one, unless you have something else you want to go with. No?
no,
Okay.
I'm good.
I loved how he so directly said, speaking of that educators are the most powerful, have the most powerful position in our country, the reason we teach is to make sure humanity can keep going. Without the educational process, we don't have that. And then you dropped the phrase that educators are midwifing the future, and you got some shock and awe from him on that one too, by the way. Congratulations for that. But I just thought that was, both of those statements were beautiful. And it just made me grateful for people doing the work.
Perfect note to end on. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. And
You bet. Thanks for
huge
finding
thanks.
him.
Yes, he moved me in ways I expected and ways I didn't expect. And I'm gonna stay in the process. And my hunch is he has that effect on people pretty consistently. I read him as someone who something is moving through, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Awesome.
All right, thanks so much. We'll see everybody next week with a shorter episode, and then we'll be back the following week with another interview.
All right. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.